We are now recording. And just a reminder, if you are asking questions on Discord or anything like that, your voice is going to be recorded and will be on the Zenobia YouTube channel. So, hello everyone. My name is Cole Worley, and today we are going to be doing a little workshop on graphic design. It's graphic design for game design. What I want to do today is basically talk you through some basic elements of graphic design process and how you can use visual thinking to solve some of your design problems. I'm also going to talk a little bit about like managing files and kind of the grunt work of doing graphics that don't necessarily impede your work as game designers. So I'm going to preface all of this by saying that graphic design is a highly specialized field. People literally spend decades of their lives learning how to use graphic design software. But many of the principles of graphic design can actually be communicated and taught pretty easily, and I'll be highlighting a few of those. So there is a difference between not knowing how to use a piece of software and not understanding key elements of visual hierarchy, for instance. And by just understanding a little bit of theory and a little bit of some organizational principles, you can really cut out a lot of heartache. The other thing I want to mention before we get started in earnest is that the best graphic design practice is one that works for you. If you find yourself getting very excited when you're picking pieces of art or something, that's fine. I don't want to harsh that. But a good graphic design practice will allow you to quickly iterate and quickly kind of elevate your own work, and will get out of the way as fast as possible. So I want to start with some really basic principles here. I'm going to be mostly using Illustrator, Adobe Illustrator, and Adobe InDesign. These are somewhat expensive programs. If you have access to a university, they oftentimes have educators' licenses, which are cheaper. If you are looking for a single one-time payment, I would recommend checking out a program called Affinity, which has now been merged with Canva. Affinity has a great suite for graphic design. It is about as powerful as anything Adobe can do, but it's one single payment. And then there are lots of free alternatives. I'm thinking here of things like Inkspace. GIMP, of course, is a Photoshop replacement, and then I'll mention things like LibreOffice. So I use LibreOffice for all of my writing. It's a free Microsoft Word replacement. You can use the LibreOffice presentation program that makes slideshows to do graphic design. In fact, it's often said that the most common piece of graphic design software in use anywhere is PowerPoint. And so if you don't have access to PowerPoint, I recommend checking out LibreOffice. It's a very powerful, useful program. I will also be keeping an eye, let's see, on chat here. So if you have questions that come up, just let me know, and I will do my best. And I will, if you hear me slurping, it's going to be me just having little bits of Gatorade to stay hydrated. Okay, let's get into the weeds now. So the very first thing I want to start with is Illustrator. So I like to use Illustrator because Illustrator is my sketchpad. It's like where a lot of my graphic design starts. And one exercise that I will do when I'm working on graphic design is to be thinking very consciously about the kit. And so this is just a general tool. So what you're seeing right now is Adobe Illustrator. Adobe Illustrator uses these things called artboards. They're like pages. Now, if you're in a place that uses A4, you can very easily set your side to A4, whatever. That's fine. They can be whatever you want. Heck, you could use these artboards to make a card if you wanted to. That's not really a card shape. That's closer. But I like to start with actually the basic unit of printing. And I try to think about this unit of printing when it comes to all of my game making. So one thing I'll do sometimes is I'll zoom out way like this, and I'll draw a table. So we're going to draw a table, and it's going to be, I don't know, that color. That's a horrible contrast. We'll make it a green table. Okay, so here's our table. And this is about the size of a dining room table. In a lot of places, maybe we want to make it a little more like a convention table. We'll round the edges, right? Looks nice. Now, the thing that's nice about having this table is I can now start to plot the size of my game. So for example, I might think, well, I want to have a board, and maybe I want that board to be 6 panels. So I'll go like this. I'll make 6 panels, and I can arrange them like this. Let me get this looking proper. And I am going to talk about a lot more specifics when we get into it. But this is very high level stuff. So I'll go like, okay, cool, great. Well, we've got those artboards here. It's our board. And then maybe I'm going to need some cards, right? Well, we can print cards on a sheet of paper. That's completely fine. So maybe I'll put those over here, and I'll make some sheets of cards. Now, how many cards do we need? Well, if you're printing a poker cards are 63 millimeters wide and 88 tall. And what you can do here is you can block out roughly how many cards you need. Now I'm going to make these so they're not green. There we go. And you will find that you can put about 9 cards on a sheet of paper. Right? There we are. And maybe we want 27 cards in our game. So let's say that this is the start of our game, and we're using Illustrator, and maybe we have a map. So I'm going to draw some mountains up here, some mountains down here. That looks great. It's fabulous. There's a shore. There's going to be a dragon. These are historical games we're making, though. It's the idea of a dragon. It's not an actual dragon. And then maybe we have some text that I'll put over here. Okay. And we'll make this 24. Now, let's say this is what our first prototype looks like. Okay. Now, one advantage of using Illustrator like this is I could save this as an Illustrator enabled. Let me find a better place to put this stuff. Let me see. I'm going to make a working folder for us. I got Molly House files coming out of my ears right now, so let's find a good spot to store it. Here we go. Let's make a folder called Zenobia Test Game. And inside Zenobia Test Game, so here we are. Here's our Zenobia Test Game. And I'm going to make a file that's going to be called, kit. We're just going to call it, our kit. And we're going to save that as a PDF. Now, the biggest advantage of this, and this is one of my favorite things to do with Illustrator, is if we save this as a PDF, and I were to open that PDF up, it has already divided everything up into pages that we can very easily print. All I have to do is hit print, and it's going to arrange these into nice little printed segments. And if you're worried about this stuff getting cut off, what you just do is when you're going to your printing settings, you just have it fit to the size of the page, and it's going to automatically, or you shrink oversized pages. I actually don't know the difference between these two options, but it doesn't matter. That will contract everything in so that it fits in the safe area of your printer, right? And if we were to print this out, we would then be able to tape all these pieces together, and we'd have a foldable board. So the reason I'm showing you this is you could do all of your game graphic design, every little bit you could do inside Illustrator. Now, you might run into a problem though. So for instance, one thing that happens pretty commonly is you might want to use an icon, right? And so we're gonna invent a little icon here. All right, so here's our icon. We're gonna put do it like this. Look at this nice icon we're making. All right, and maybe it looks like that, and we'll I don't know. I'm not gonna make this much more complicated than it needs to be. Okay, here's our icon. There he is. He's looking good. I'm going to give him a nose. All right, so this is our icon. Now, you can use groups in Illustrator. Let's Control G to now you have this icon. You can make lots of copies of it. And if you're laying out your cards, you can just start sticking that on the different cards wherever you want. Now, the alignment and stuff doesn't have to be perfect, especially when you're just trying to get things into print layout so you can test. But there is one big problem with using Illustrator this way, and that is that we have this shape, but if I want to change one of these, I don't want to have to change all of them. And actually, Illustrator's got your back here. There's a feature built inside Illustrator called Symbols, which you can find over here, the symbol of the club. You can save a symbol. So these over here are not symbols. This is a symbol because it has a little black cross on in the center of it. Now the advantage of symbols, so these two over here are not symbols, this is a symbol, is let's say I'm laying out my cards. So I've got these cards coming out in layout like that. And I decide that actually this is much too happy of a symbol. And so if you double click on it, you will go to edit the symbol definition. And I could say, yeah, actually I want all of my guys to be sad. And that will change all of the symbols to a sad face. So if you just want, like if you could have one program and you want to build your game of simple prototypes, I really do recommend Illustrator and to use symbols and artboards in this fashion for early prototyping. It's just so easy. There are problems with it that will happen later because you can only handle so big of files with it. But a lot of the primary graphic design work can happen in here. So that's just a brief overview of Illustrator. Now, the first thing that you want to be thinking about when you're working on your graphic design for a game is how you plan on using the assets. This is really, I can't overemphasize this enough. If you are, for instance, making a board and you imagine that you're almost never going to change that board, I would recommend using a felt tip marker and a big piece of paper. You do not need to use a computer if you are planning on hardly ever adjusting your board. Or if you do need to adjust it, you can just scribble things out and write new things in. Don't think that you need to go through a ton of graphic design tutorials to make a simple card. You can go pick up some index cards, or you can just cut regular printer paper to create kind of basic cards, just to get yourself to the place where you're actually able to do graphics work. Now, if you have an asset that you're going to be changing a lot, and you're going to be adjusting little numbers and things like that, then we have to start thinking a little bit differently. So what I'd like to do is introduce you to a kind of basic file structure system. So I usually think about the file structure as this. So we have game files, which I'm going to write out here. Game files, right? Game files. These are the things that we use to make our game, right? It's a file with cards, whatever. Now, there are files that are smaller that are assets, right? And so assets exist in a subfolder. Here's our little subfolder. And this is going to be in the same directory, and I'll show you how to build some of this stuff. So these are our assets. All right, so the game files are going to use the assets to create cards. Then we have another class of files called kit makers. This is because I'm sad that I can't be in the classroom today. Here we go. Kit makers. Kit makers use the game files. Now, what kinds of things are we making with kit makers? Well, many of you are going to be testing digitally and in person. And so I actually usually have two kit makers. I have a kit maker for print, and then I have another kit maker for whatever digital platform I'm using. And I'll show you some examples of that pretty soon. All right. So let's put some of these principles into effect. And we're actually going to start with our frowny face icon here. Okay, so let's copy our little guy, and we are going to start a new file, and it's going to be 30 millimeters by 30 millimeters. Okay, oops. Sorry, 1 second. Goodness. All right. So here we have a little tiny 30 millimeter square on an artboard, and we're going to put our little sad face icon right on it, just like that. We'll center it so it looks nice. He's looking great. Now what I'm going to do is save this. So we are in our Zenobia test game, and I'm going to make a folder that's just called assets, and I'm going to call this person sad face. Okay? So we have now created our first game asset. Now, let's actually use a separate program to help us structure these files. So I'll step back here a little bit and just say a word about the way the Adobe Suite and most graphic design software works. Basically, there are 3 layers to it. The first layer are things with pixels. Those are often Photoshop files or GIMP files. Those are called raster images because they're dealing with pixel data like JPEGs and PNGs. Or at least those are the kinds of files that are being produced by Photoshop, by a Photoshop file. Then we have Illustrator, which was really good at dealing with vectors. Vectors are a very different way of recording information. You'll see that these shapes are, it's really just lines and stroke thicknesses that are building all of these things. This means that vectors tend to be a lot smaller than JPEGs, because instead of recording the information of every pixel or every group of pixels, instead it's just a bunch of math. And then the last layer files are for the typesetting programs. And these are things like InDesign, and they're really good at dealing with words and also tying all the files together. So let's head over to InDesign and talk about card layout. I know many of your projects use cards in some way, and so I want to highlight them. So when you're working in InDesign, we have to start by setting up some rules. We don't need facing pages. I like my margins to be 3. Whoops, there we go. And here we have our very first card. So there's our card. Now, there's a lot to wrap your head around in this program. And I want to quadruple emphasize, no one is expecting you to master InDesign in the course of a few months. And even if you already know a lot of InDesign, know that your knowledge of InDesign is not going to be that much of a help. But I do want to walk folks through some basic principles of InDesign. So before I start doing anything here, I always like to sketch out my idea, and I'm going to use Illustrator as my kind of sketchboard. So imagine we have, I'm going to go back to our kit that we made. So we've got a card. Here's our card. And what do I want? Well, I know that the card is going to have some kind of large icon or illustration. So maybe I want that at the top of the card. Okay, great. And then I know there's going to be text. Well, what kind of text do I want? Well, I want a card name, right? And it's going to be big. And then there's probably going to be an effect. And it's probably going to be less big. Okay? So there we have this. And sometimes, you can drop lorem in, or you can just copy and paste a bunch of text just to get a sense of how it's going to look. Okay. And then maybe at the very bottom, I want, like a card number. That's a useful thing to have. A little card number here. So 12. Card numbers are especially useful because when you're taking notes after playtests, you can just write down like card 12 hyphen, and then make your note. And then you could imagine a world where maybe I want like a different type of icon that's going to be sitting down here at the bottom. Now, before we go any farther, and actually I'm not going to use the same picture because that's confusing. Let's just use circles. Now, you'll note that I am not trying to make this thing pretty. It is pretty ugly. Big, bright colors, very garish, all the rest. That is completely on purpose. We are not trying to make something that looks really pretty right now. We are just trying to see what the thing is going to look like. Now, when your eye is drawn to this card, you're always going to look at one specific thing first. And the thing that you're probably going to look at first is either this icon or the name. So these two elements are occupying the largest level of visual hierarchy. Now, if you start by looking at the icon, you're going to drift to the name. And if you start looking at and then after you look at the name, you're probably going to go down and read this text. And then this text, these icons here on the bottom, these are not going to be referred to. These are kind of tertiary elements of the visual hierarchy. So the main thing to do when you're doing graphic design is to always ask yourself, where does the eye start? Where does the eye go? And then if you need to reference a piece of information, like imagine later it says, count all the gold coins in your player area. How quickly can a player add those elements? And hopefully you can see that, like, if we felt like, for instance, let's say this were really big. Now this is kind of like you're definitely starting here. Maybe I want to de-emphasize the illustration if this is an illustration. Well, there are lots of ways you can do that. I just used opacity here to lighten it up. Or maybe I want to make the name bold, or I could put it in a special typeface. It's a typeface I'm using in Mollyhouse, right? Because now, even if I build that out, this name is going to command a little bit more information. I mean, a little bit more attention. Now, one question I get a lot about graphic design, which I'll just mention here, is sometimes people ask me, like, when should you put a number and when should you just put a number of icons? Which is a really good like design puzzle. So My general rule is that if I'm going to ask players to count things, I will use icons if the individual units of counting are 1, 2, or 3. But the human eye is really bad at quickly counting things if there's more than 3 of them. So if you quickly look at this, you might not have realized that you're looking at 5 dots right away, and it might be more effective to put a 5 like that. Right, now we know that that's 5 dots. Now this can cause a little bit of a problem. You'll see that this type here that I'm using, this fancy font, which is called charcuterie etched, doesn't really look like it actually belongs to this. Well, there's some ways to get around that. One of them is if we made this icon bigger, we could then put the number right in it. That definitely shows that they belong. The other way to do it is we could, for instance, let me go like this. We could use a different typeface like this. We could even potentially color it. Now that the actual colors here are not doing us a lot of favors, but you can see how by using elements like color and shape and stroke size, you can connect things together. Okay, so let's say cards never have 5 coins in them in our game. We're really going to be having only 1 to 3 coins. Excellent. We're in a pretty good spot. We want our layout to look like this. Okay, well, let's go back to InDesign. So the thing about working layouts here is, again, if you only want to learn one program, I always recommend people learn Illustrator because it's like kind of it's a good Swiss Army knife. And you could say, this is card 2 and this is card 3. And you could have different symbols that you're using for these icons up top, and you could be manually dropping pieces like that to do all of your editing. And all of this is totally fine. But if you find yourself with more than 30 or 40 cards, or if you want to make a layout change, like maybe you decide that actually what you want to do is have the illustrations be at the bottom of the card, the names and the effects be at the top of the card, and this element down here being centered. Now that's not very hard to do if you're only designing 3 cards, but if you had all of these sheets to do, you're going to pretty quickly get frustrated with yourself. Thankfully, InDesign is really good at precisely that. So here we are in InDesign looking at our card. All right, so where do we start? Well, let's start with that icon. So if I go over here to my folder that I made earlier, let me get to it real fast. So here's our Zenobia test game folder, and there's the assets folder. I'm going to click on that. And now here's our sad face icon. I can just drag that bloop, right in here. Hey, there he is. And then we can center him in the card. Maybe we want him to be up at the top. Okay, that looks really good. And actually, the place I want to put him, over here on the Pages panel, there are 2 different types of pages fundamentally in the world of InDesign. The first are parent pages, and the second are kind of regular pages. So this regular page down here has a little A on it. That A means that the A parent has been applied. So if I put my little icon here, you'll see that it automatically appears on this page here. And if I make more A pages, all of these pages are going to have this layout because I've assigned it here. Now, if I want to change the layout, that's easy. You just drag this layout right here, and you just drag it over the cards. And you can say, you know what, I actually don't want these cards to have any layout. So if you're designing a game with suits, for instance, this is a very good way to quickly apply suits. And indeed, you can even nest suits within each other. You can have a parent that has a parent within it. That's getting a little bit on the more complicated side of things. We won't go into that too far. All right, so here we have this. Now let's talk about text. The thing about text is that text always takes a style. So, oops, I want to do that. So here we have some text and some body text. Okay. So I'm going to name text and some body text. Okay. So as a default, if you go to your paragraph style menu, which is over here, and by the way, if your InDesign doesn't look like this, you can make it look like this by going to Window, Workspace, Advanced. This is the workspace that I like working in. Everyone's feelings are going to be different about this. If you ever have trouble finding things in InDesign, there are pretty good search features within it too, and it's not hard to just ask Google, how do I get to the paragraph styles? The general way you do it, though, is through the window menu. You can go styles, paragraph styles, and then InDesign will open up the thing that you need for you. Okay, so let's make our first two styles. The first style, I'm going to double click on this. This opens up our style menu. Now this is all like pretty overwhelming. There's a ton of stuff over here that you don't need to worry about. But the main thing is that we're going to call this style card name, okay? And we are going to go to the basic character formats, and we're going to choose that charcuterie etched font that we really liked. And I like to turn on preview so I can see what I'm doing. And we want it to be big because we want people to know this is the name. Now there's a lot of fancy things that we can do in this menu that we'll talk about a little bit later, but this is pretty good. This is what we want out of our card name. Now this text right here is some body text. So we need to make a new style that handles body text. Now what I sometimes like to do is show, let me see if I can find it. Oh my goodness. See, now I'm going to forget how to open it up. Yeah, there it is. Control-Alt-I, or type at the very bottom, show hidden characters. So what this is saying is that I typed the word name text. The little dot is a space. And then I pressed enter, and it started a new paragraph. And in InDesign, and then this hashtag is the end of the text. In InDesign, every paragraph has its own text. So what we're going to do is make a new style. We're going to call it body text. And what I would recommend for body text is that you primarily need it to be readable. Readable is the most important thing. So I'll use Times New Roman here. Times New Roman is a great typeface. So good. The only problem with Times New Roman is it was like loaded on default on all the computers, so people thought it was boring. It's an excellent, super readable font. Works very good at small sizes. You can easily have size 10 Times New Roman, even size 6, and it's going to be completely readable. So we'll go to 12 as if we were, writing an undergraduate paper or something. Now what you can see here is I have two paragraphs of text, and there's a card name and there's a body. Now let's add another text to body, another paragraph of body. So we'll say this is another paragraph of body text, and we're going to use it to learn about spacing. Now in InDesign, you can always press W to go to print view, and Shift W goes to fancy print view. Not that you need to do those things very often, but it's nice sometimes to get rid of all those text box lines just when you're trying to compose. Now, one main thing that you'll notice is we have two paragraphs of body text here, right? We've got a name text paragraph, good. Then we've got some body text, and then we've got this other paragraph of body text. But there's a problem. Those body texts are running into each other. That's not good. So let's go back. Whoops. Let's go back. So what happened there, by the way, is if I select this entire text box and I click body, it's going to make all the text body text. Card name, it's all card name text. So you want to click on the paragraph. You don't need to highlight it. You can just click anywhere in the paragraph. There we go. Okay, let's look at the body text. So our problem right now is that these two paragraphs look like they're one paragraph, but they're actually two. So you can go into the body menu for paragraph style options, and you will see a submenu called Indents and Spacing. And the most critical tool here is you get access to something called leading, but it's the space before the paragraph. So if we do this, you'll see that it creates some space before the paragraph. We could also, if we wanted to, put our space after the paragraph. This is the advantage of really kind of associating that first line with the name. But it's up to you. Even just one little spacing can go a pretty good way. You can also use the basic character menu to manually adjust the leading here, bloop, bloop, and just kind of tighten up all that text. So there's a lot of like weird little tools to play with here. And I always recommend that people just explore it. You can also use this menu to change the indent and the alignment. So I could say center this, and I could say, actually I want to balance ragged lines. And I'll show you what that does in a second. So balancing ragged lines means that if you have a long, well, here I'll just show you. Facing a trick. Okay, so, that's a great question, Stephanie. I will show you in a second. So let's say we have this. You can see the word tricky thing is just kind of hanging out here. Whoops. Go away. Okay. So if we go to our body here and I click on balance ragged lines, you'll see that what it's going to do is kind of group the text together. Um, if you don't like hyphens for whatever reason, you'll see there's a hyphenation. You can turn off hyphenation. Right. Lots of things like that. Now, if your body text is going to be centered, make sure that your card names are also centered, because otherwise people are going to think something that doesn't mean anything means something. So there we go. Boop, just like that. Okay, so now we've got this. Now, a very excellent question from Stephanie about the benefit to do all one text box rather than separate boxes. So broadly, if we had two different paragraphs, so let me lay out this text in a different way. So we're going to do this. Do this. So, like this. We could have separate text boxes for everything. The problem with this is if this text is going to get long, it's now going to be overset, which means we have to manually adjust this, and then we have to move this thing down. If you put everything in one text box, then I can very easily adjust the spacing, add text, delete text, anything like that, and InDesign will know to flow the text naturally. So it's, or not naturally, just according to the rules that have been set. So I highly recommend working with as few text boxes as possible. Okay, so we are on our way. This card is looking pretty okay. And maybe I feel like this name is not sufficiently jumping out of everything else. You also have the ability, using paragraph rules, to put lines. Oh, why is that? Oh, okay. This is a good lesson, which I'll talk about here in a second. Let me offset that. There we go. So what is happening here? You might say, well, why did this paragraph also get the line? It's because we based this style on card name. You should always click no paragraph style, because then turn off those. Okay. It takes some working. I don't know how to make that easier. A lot of times when you're working on something in InDesign, you're going to make mistakes. That's fine. You're going to kind of wander off in the desert. It's okay. Just ask questions. The world is filled with people learning how to do graphic design, and they are always happy to help generally. And you generally, I'll say, don't need to worry too much about. I would just say, sorry, mumbling my words. It's okay to explore the program. You can't really break a file very easily in this. So if you want to know what all those submenus and the paragraph styles do, just experiment with them. All right, now let's go back to our pages. We've got, oh, I made a mistake. This should be on the parent page. Okay, so we've got a card. Here it is. Now the problem with parent pages that you'll see is that we can't edit this. This is stuck. Now, if you're making, let's say, if you're making a game like Settlers of Catan and you have a bunch of resource cards that are all the same, well, you could just make a parent card for every different resource. That's pretty easy to do. And then you just drop those cards you need into this file. But let's say you want to actually edit these cards. Well, what you're going to do is hit Control-Shift to unlock an element. So now this element right here has been unlocked. I can edit it. So I can say this is going to be Sally, and Sally rides a bike and whatever. Okay, so now we have a card that is special. Now, critically, because we have not moved this box, InDesign still thinks that this box is attached to its parent page, which means if we want to move this up a little bit, you'll see over here on the right, it might be kind of small, that if I move this thing way to the bottom, it moves on both pages, which is great. If I want to make any layout adjustment, I can just make it on the parent page. Likewise, let's say I don't like that this icon is so dark, and so I want to lighten it up, so I can use opacity to make it semi-transparent. If I do that on the parent page, it's going to do that for everything that is on it. Great. Okay, so that's basics of parent pages. Now let's talk about what happens when we have a sheet of cards. So here is a sheet of here are 9 cards. I just made some duplicates of these. We could go through and put little edits on these things. That's totally fine. Now remember over here that we've got a game file, and it's called our test game cards. So I'm going to go into InDesign here. I'm going to save this as, it's going to put me in a weird spot because that's all, one second, I got to figure out where I made this folder. Bup, 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 bup. There we go. Okay, so in our workshops, here we are in our test game, and then we're just going to call this poker cards for test game. Now I'm calling them poker cards because that's the size of the card. Okay, so we have our file. It's called poker cards for test game. But what do we do that with these? We would not want to go file print. This would be bad because what this is going to do is print one card on every page. So we're going to have 9 pages with a single card on them. So instead, I want to go back to our little file plan, and we can say, okay, we've got a game file, poker cards. It's using an asset, our little sad face that we made. And then we're going to make another file that's going to be our kit maker. Okay, so let's make a kit maker. So I'm going to go back to InDesign now. And I'm going to make a new document. And this one is going to be, and I'll use this, as if I were printing it at home. I would get a letter sheet of paper. I don't need facing pages. Here we have a letter sheet of paper. Now, this little box over here in the left is the rectangle frame tool. And I can make a rectangle frame that is, we're going to say it's 63 millimeters by 88 millimeters. There we go. And then I'm going to make a little scaffold for our cards to help us print them easily, just like this. When you group things, which I'm about to do here, so I'll group this and center it. There we are. And then I'm going to put this on the parent page. Here we are. Here's our lovely page. Now, because I like to have lines when I cut, I'm going to go ahead and give this frame a stroke, which is up here. So now you can see that we have this little grid. If there's an X in it, it means that the grid is ready and willing to accept a card. So let's take a look. Here we have page 1 of our card, our maker. We're going to save this as a print and play kit maker for test game. Okay, that's what we're calling this file. Whoops. Now, what I'm going to do is drop our files in here, and this is very important. So I'm going to go over here to place, right here, and place. Once again, we are in the Mollyhouse files, which maybe I'll show you how some of these files work in a second. Let me go to our streams and Zenobia workshops. Great. So if I grab the poker cards for our game, and then this is the magic button right here, show import options. I'm going to click that. And under my import options, I can choose, instead of just importing the preview page, I can import all pages. This is going to let me drop these cards on this element. Okay, so we now have a file that is built of other files. And if we were to export this as a PDF, we'd be able to very easily print it. And the best part is, let's say I go to my poker card file and I say, okay, this card is called Todd. And this card, I don't know, I'll pick my son's name. This is Auden. And this card is going to be, I don't know, Nell. And this card's Owen. Okay. Whoops. So I can spend a lot of time messing around on these cards. And then when I save this file, so I'll save that file. I'll go back here, and you'll see there's now a little hazard symbol in the top left. What that hazard symbol means is something in this file has changed. InDesign doesn't know what's changed yet, though. So we go up to our links, and it says, hey, you're linking from a card called Poker Cards for Test Game. There's a hazard symbol, which means it's modified. I can double-click this to update it, and you'll see that now this file reflects the current card files. So if we are exporting to a PDF from this print and play kit maker, it's always going to be fully updated. Now we can actually even go a step farther. For example, if we go back here to our sad face, remember the sad face, we might say, this doesn't seem sad enough. What we really want is a sad color. So we're gonna give this the saddest color, which I'm gonna decide is red arbitrarily. So now this is really, it's looking a little bit more angry. Maybe we want the face to be angry. There we go. Sad face is now angry face. Okay. Um, so when we go to InDesign and we open up our poker cards, the same thing is going to happen. They're going to say, hey, your sad face has changed. Do you want to update it? And I'll say, of course I want to update it. And there it is. Now you might be asking yourself, well, this isn't that bright red. What happened to the bright red? Well, we are knocking it out. We have decided, if we go up here to the parent page, that this is at an opacity of 50%. I could dial that up to 100, and that's going to pop there. Okay, we go like that. Now we save these. We go back to our print and play maker. The print and play maker sees that something's up. We update this again, and now we've got our angry faces on all these cards. Okay, so that's like a basic file structure thing. Now I want to show you something very important. When you are building, you're not just building kits for physical print. You are also building kits for your digital versions of the game. Now, when I use Tabletop Simulator and Screen Top and a few others, but when I'm building, you have to build these things called sprite sheets. And I'll just show you the Molly House ones. It's a Zenobia game. Okay, so for all of our sprite sheets are in this very messy folder. And you'll see that we have things like these cards. And a sprite sheet has to have no white space because a computer is going and drawing lines and cutting out the cards, right? And so I would tell the computer, like, hey, this sprite sheet has 2 rows and 4 columns. Cut it up. And in this way, you can also cut up an entire deck. I'll show you a much prettier deck. This is the current Molly House deck. Here are all the primary cards of the game. But it's the same principle, right? These cards are just being placed, and then the computer is going in and kind of cutting them all up. And some of these cards are not done, obviously. Okay, so how do you do that? Well, it's pretty easy. So we have a print and play maker for a test game. Now let's make a new document. And we're going to call this, this document is going to be the print and play maker, I'll use the digital kit maker. Okay, so this is our digital kit maker. Now, the important thing here is you have to decide how large you want your sprites to be. So remember that a poker card is 63 by 88. There you are. There's a card. And so we always have to be operating in this unit. This is our base unit. So this little button over here allows us to adjust the page size. And what we can do is we can say, okay, we're going to go 63, height 88. Okay, so this is a sprite of 1. And then InDesign allows you to use any kind of operator in here. So I could say, okay, well, I want 4 columns. So I'll say 63 times 4. And I want it to be 3 columns high. So 88 times 3, a little asterisk up there. And then we go like that. And now we have built a perfect little cutter. Now, we don't even have to worry about like putting black borders on these cards for easy cutting because the computer is going to be cutting them pixel perfect. Now, if I want to place my poker cards for the test game, I click Import Options. I say I'm going to do all of them, and I just start dropping them in. Now, if I were to open up Tabletop Simulator or Screen Top or any number of things, I could upload this file and then instruct the program to cut this thing up. One thing I'll say about the exports is that if you are exporting, whoops, not that one. If we are exporting for a physical print and play, we're probably going to want to export as a PDF. Right, so we're going to say print and play maker. I'm going to call this March Kit, right? And so whatever it's a PDF. We don't need to be fancy here. Let me find where I put this. Okay. Boom. Okay, so I've now made a PDF, which will let me very easily print all these cards, and here's the PDF right here. with all the cards kind of nicely laid out. Um, Now, if you are making a digital kit, you don't want a PDF. You want a JPEG or a PNG. Most of the time, a JPEG. Although we could have a longer conversation about that if you'd like. And you're going to use the export menu or Control E, and you just select down here that you want a JPEG. I usually recommend using a resolution of like 200. It doesn't really matter that much. And we're going to export that. And you'll see that what we've just made is this little JPEG. And the computer will know where to draw the lines as soon as you tell it how many columns and rows. So we don't need to worry about that too much. Now, I've just a couple last little things that I want to show you, and then we can talk a little bit. I can answer questions. Ooh, yes. As to what? Okay, so there's a good question about using JSONs, which we can talk about. So one thing to note is that you'll see that this folder is now getting very busy. That's not good. So one thing I recommend is creating another subfolder. I'll go back to our file structure menu here. You're going to want to make another folder, and we're going to call this folder the exports. Right? And so we go here to our folder menu. We're going to make a new folder. It's called the exports. And then what you can do here is you can have subfolders. Oh, sorry, my computer's acting up. It's really unhappy that I wanted to make a new folder. Just hold, please. There we go. And then what you can do is make a couple folders in here. And one folder could be, print and play PDFs. And then another folder might be, like a TTS kit or whatever. And that way, oops, that's not, there we go. Perfect. So now, as we're, working on these files, I can say, okay, my March kit, these are now going into my exports folder. Oh, it's mad that I have it open. So these go to my exports folder, and the JPEG is part of the TTS kit, and the March kit goes in the print and play PDFs. So in this way, you can keep yourself orderly, because it's very easy to accidentally find yourself just in a total mess of files, and even professionals have that problem. These little files right here, you don't need to worry about. They're just lock files. They're temporary files that get created when InDesign is doing things. They go away when you close files. Okay, so what we could do, I'm going to probably be running a whole separate tutorial on TTS. But what I'll mention is if you see these little green dots right here, these green dots mean that the files that we're in right now are Dropbox hosted files. So everything we've done so far is on Dropbox. What I do for my Dropbox files is if I go to, well, actually I'll use Molly House as an example. Why not? Whoops. That's not where we want to go. We want to go to there. Okay, so here's all my messy Molly House files. What I do is I right click on this file and I copy the Dropbox link. Okay, so I have a Dropbox link now for this file. And I will, if I open a Chrome tab, I could paste that link in, and it's going to take me to the site where this is hosted. Except it's got all this garbage up top because Dropbox is trying to present it to me. So there's actually a sneaky thing you can do, and I will talk about this in detail in the TTS workshop if I give it, is you can change this file path to dl.dropboxusercontent.com, and it will just directly open the file. So now it doesn't have anything else around it. You can see it's a pretty large file. This path can be used with ScreenTop or with TTS or a lot of other software as a root, or not a root, but as an anchor, a pointer, so that the files that you're working in can be hosted digitally. And then with Tabletop Simulator, you can use caching. So you can, whenever you if you just update the files locally on your hard drive, and if it's linked into Dropbox, it will also update them on the cloud. And then when you load into TTS, if you clear your cache, all the files will be totally up to date. So I always tell my playtesters when we're playtesting to basically always be clearing their cache when a new version comes out. And that's a whole separate conversation that we can get into on a later day. Now, the JSON. Arthur also mentioned about JSONs. A TTS mod is a JSON file, which is just markup. So I'll show you what a JSON looks like. This is a JSON for Malios kit from August 22nd. So this is probably not a very good kit. But basically what you're looking at here is an inventory of all the objects that the game is asking us to spawn, or that we're asking it to spawn. And every once in a while you'll see like, oh, it's pulling something from the Steam cloud here. You basically never need to edit this file. When you need to never edit directly, and you can see here's the custom deck. Where with the dl.dropbox. When you save a game in TTS, it creates a JSON. That JSON is what holds the saved game. So you will use them, but you never have to edit any of this stuff. You don't need to do that. Okay, so that was a very quick tour through some graphic design principles. The main ones that I wanted to just do as a review is first, when you're starting your projects, think about the size of a table. Think about using whatever the basic element that you can print, if it's a sheet of paper or an index card or whatever. Think about using it to help you frame your game visually. Like if I have a 6-panel board like this, and then I want to have player boards, they're gonna be taking up space in this, in this kind of visual tableau. I really recommend, if you haven't measured the table that you're going to be doing your playtesting on, measure it, even if it's a little cafe table. Get a sense of the space where you want your game to be played, and take it into account as you're building things. You can use artboards if you just want to learn one program. I recommend doing Illustrator. You can use artboards to make it artboards and symbols to block out your kits and easily export them to PDFs. Symbols are essentially linked objects that exist within one file, so that if you change one symbol, you will change them all like that. If you're going to do something more, and then when you're building assets, remember the rules of visual hierarchy. Where does a person's eye drift? Is the text large enough? You'll note that I haven't really talked about art at all. I would say when you're in the early stages of prototyping, do not worry about art. It's just going to get in the way. Now, obviously, if you need the art to tell part of your story, that is a little bit of a different, that's a different matter. But for now, when you're testing, like let's say you're going to have these cards have illustrations on them, what you can do is say like, okay, well, I know that there's going to be an illustration stripe up here. And so you can just block it, with some color or some gray, just so you have a sense of where you're going to stick the illustration. Maybe you're like, oh, if I put this icon over the illustration, I can make the illustration larger. Again, this is stuff that can be done with pencil and pen. You don't need any fancy software to do it, but if you know a little bit of Illustrator, I find it's helpful to kind of think in Illustrator. When your projects are getting a little bit more complicated than this, I recommend moving to a little file structure like this. Your game is going to be composed of game files. These are basically built around assets of different sizes. Poker cards, that's a game file. Player boards, that's a game file. Those game files are going to be using game assets to build them. Assets include things like backgrounds, illustrations, icons, all of that. Once you have these things assembled, you can build another set of files called your kit makers, which you can use to export print kits or kits for digital. And you can keep those exports in a separate file, both for your own archiving and also to keep your file system clean. One thing I often tell people about rules writing, and I mentioned this in my previous workshop, is that the process of writing a rule is design. Designing and rules writing are the same thing. They're just the same thing expressed a little bit differently. So if you have trouble writing a rule, there might be a problem in the design itself. That's also true of graphical language. If you're having trouble expressing an idea graphically, you are also likely having a problem with the. There might be a problem with the core design. This is something that I run into all the time. I could give you a dozen examples from Molly House within the last week where we've had a hard time expressing something graphically and then realized like, oh, we need to be rethinking how the rules work or how the design works to make this concept cleaner. Okay, and then that is pretty much it. That takes us almost to time. I'm happy to hang around for 5-10 minutes and answer any questions you might have. This is a good question. So for everything Dropbox, do you need a specific paid plan to have multiple people be able to download your hosted objects? I believe that Dropbox's free account will be large enough for you to do whatever you need to do. You don't. The features that you gain by going to a paid plan are mostly size, and also a few other little things, but I think Dropbox will still let you do it. If you can't or don't want to use Dropbox in whatever way, you can use things like Imager and other file hosting software, or file hosting sites. Or if you have access to your own domain, you can just stick the images right on there and be fine. But I believe if Dropbox still offers free plans, the free plan in the past has been able to do everything. I think you can use Google Drive too. And Google Drive, there is a weird way that you have to change the file paths to get the like true file path in Google Drive. Okay, thank you for that question. That's good. All right. Anything else? I know this was like a whirlwind. It's very there's so much to talk about. And I had a funny when I saw Mar. I saw I don't know if Mar's still here. Yes. They posted their card designs, and I was like, oh yeah, there's like a lot we could talk about even with just a single card design and just like fixing it. But this is meant to be hopefully giving you some core rules and then also some ways of just sorting through the actual files here. And again, you don't have to be fancy at all. Like everything I just described to you can be done with PowerPoint and MS Paint.
Hey, Cole. Hey, everyone else. Uh, it's me, Shraddha. Uh, most of late, I've been using InDesign and Illustrator for a while now.
Hmm.
I discovered this tool called dexterous.com.au,
Okay.
which is purely made uh, to create asset files to be used with Tabletop Simulator and with Screentop. And it's a fantastic tool. If you haven't checked it out, perhaps for the other contestants who do not use Adobe Suite, Illustrator, or InDesign, or it's intimidating. But
Yes. Could
yeah,
you post a link
dexterous,
in the contestant chat? Not the voice
certainly,
chat. Yeah, thank you. The other
yes,
tool that
and
I recommend, and this is for those of you who might have a little bit of light programming experience. It's really not like if you've never programmed anymore, this could be your first programming language. But there is a piece of software called Nandeck, which is a very good way. Oh my gosh, I've not been on this website in so long, and now I'm worried that I'm gonna send you down a rabbit hole. Let me see if I can. Yeah. So there's a piece of software called Nandeck that is really useful at. I'll post that link there. Really useful at generating complex card decks. And so it's just something to keep in mind. I used it a lot when I was working on the first edition of Premiere. Stephanie asked about if I could say again what a sprite is. A sprite is just an image that is going to be subdivided. Um, and that's really it. So, and sometimes not even subdivided. A sprite is simply an image that is then going to be loaded into another piece of software. Oftentimes, there's a level of subdivision, and usually sprites are PNGs or JPEGs is the main thing. What a good question. Oh, Multideck is also very good if you have a Macintosh. Multideck is a very useful program. Good question here. Do you recommend any tools for cutting cards quickly? Well, my office is a mess, or I'd wheel my camera over. I have a roto trim that I adore. It's it's insane. I mean, I think it's a $200 paper cutter, and it's one of the best purchases I've ever made. None of you should go out and buy a $200 paper cutter. My goodness, but uh, seriously, go to a print shop and just use their paper cutter. Almost all print shops will not mind if you use their paper cutters because they're mostly self sharpening. I recommend just using rail cutters and going to your local print shop and cutting things there. For cards, if you're building a game with a lot of cards, I really recommend buying some card sleeves and just a deck of cards for backing. So all of my prototypes use sleeves and just old cards that I use for backing. It allows you to shuffle the cards. It gives them more heft. It makes you feel like you're really building something. It's one of my favorite parts of game design is getting to like sleeve that first kit, and it actually like works and looks pretty nice too. Oh, it's called a rota trim. There you go. ROTATRIM. But um, if you have access in the U.S. at least, FedExes, Kinko's FedEx, all of them have roto trims. Most print shops will have a roto trim or something equivalent. They are very, very, very good cutters. You almost certainly do not need to buy your own paper cutter unless you're really getting into the hobby. Um, yeah, so I would say borrow someone's. Borrow someone's. Okay, great. So some things that I did not really cover here are icon designs and things like that. I just want to mention that like a kind of golden rule of graphic design that I sort of forgot to really talk about is know that different types of assets ask different things of the players. So a card can have small text because a player is going to hold it physically close to their face. A board is going to be 2 feet away, 3 feet away from a person's face. It can't have as small of text. Likewise, when it comes to icons, lean towards bright colors and also distinguishing silhouettes. I cannot emphasize that enough. So I'll use these guys as an example. So like if these two icons had different game meetings, this is obviously very bad. Even if I went through and said like, yes, this one's brown, I'm like, okay, this is not good at all. But if I could give it a different silhouette, like that even, they could even be the same color, right? So like know that color and silhouette are your biggest friends when you're making icons that need to distinguish themselves. You don't need to worry about that stuff so much when you're doing icons like this that are only going to be counted in number, right? This is just a coin. The main thing that a player's having to do is count the number of those things. Do I have favored text sizes for poker cards? I usually start at 10 point. So most of the body text on games I work on is 10 point. I think 12 is a little bit too big. Fonts, let me see if I can find an easy chart to show you all. Font height. Uh, so all fonts have a number of elements, right? Stroke width, capital height. One of the most important heights is this thing called the X height, which the X height is if there's a lowercase x, how high is that X? The higher X height a font has, the more readable it is at small sizes. I'll give you an example. So here we have some text. Okay, so here's our quick brown fox jumping over the lazy dog. And we're going to go ahead and size that down here. Now, this is size 6. I mean, again, I have the ability to digitally zoom, so it's size whatever. This font, Myriad Pro, which is a Adobe system font, is actually like pretty good. But if you were to look at a font with a worse X height, and I'll use like that one is a bad example because it's a script and it doesn't feel fair to compare it. Don't have all my nice work fonts on here. Here we go. Even this one. This one has a worse X height, so it's a little bit harder to read when small. Now, if you compare that to more modern types, so like this one, they're like, look at how high that Q is compared to the top of the K versus this to that. The higher the X height, the easier a font's going to be to read generally. But text sizes start at 10. Don't. But also like know that every element of your game, even the most beautiful element, is a barrier to play. So try to do what you can to make the game as approachable and as clean as possible, which means like, fewer lines of text with a larger font are usually going to do better for you than just trying to put a bunch of rules in it. If you know the game Pax Pamir, the thematic text that's in italics is is 6, and so like major powers are oftentimes in 10, right, like that, and then 6 is used for the other stuff. One thing I'll show you here. One thing about italics is italics usually will be shorter. This is actually a funny example of that not being true. Oh, it's because I'm in display. That's fascinating. So you can see if I use like a medium, this is Minion, which is another very good, useful font. When you switch something to italics, you gain a little bit of space, which is nice. However, because of the way we learn board games, I'll tell you, most players do not read italic text. They assume it is not gameplay relevant. So be careful when you use italics. Um, okay, cool. Well, that's it. Thank you all for coming by. I will take a look at the chat if you have specific like graphics problems that you're running into. I am just so happy to help you with those. Um, and I can just point out little things that might make things easier or harder. Um, Broadly, again, when you're working with graphics, keeping it simple, keep it bold, keep it clear. It's all about clarity. And then when it comes to the overall structure of files, try to make it so that your graphic design practice is helping you do more design. You don't want to spend a day like adjusting all of your page sizes very slightly. That's a horrible use of a design day. But that's it. Thank you so much for coming by. We now, I'm happy to report, have our seminar descriptions and scheduling pretty much ready to share. There's a couple people I'm waiting to hear back from. On the 10th of April, and I will be posting this in chat, there will be Damon Stone, ex FFG, worked on lots of great games. Uh, as well as the game on Haiti from Zenobia 1. We'll be doing a talk on asymmetry in game and faction design, so stay tuned for that. And then probably the week following, if we can't find someone to do TTS, I'll slide in and do the TTS tutorial then. Okay, well, have a wonderful day, everybody. Thanks for coming by, and good luck on your projects.